Okay, so what is the CSS? Cascading style sheets is used to define styles for your web page. It's called CSS. How to apply the CSS in our web page? So there are three ways. First is using inline style attribute on an element. Second is using a style block in the header section of web page, and the third is loading an external CSS file using the link tag in our header section. So the next is how to use the variables in a CSS. We declare a variable in a root, as we see here. This root is a pseudo clause or a rule, we can say. As we see here, we have declared one my variable name variable, which is value is having one em, and in our styles we'll use this my variable name for height property. So this is a way to use the variables as a value of a property. The first is the rule, the root rule, and the second is using the variable using var method. We can say var and the brackets, and we are passing the variable name here. We also can set the default value for this height variable by passing the second argument for this var method. As we see here, we have assigned a default value as 2.5 em to the height property. Okay, the next is CSS sprites. CSS sprites combine multiple images into one single large image. Next is a box model. CSS box model is a rectangular layout for HTML element that consists of content, padding, border, and a margin. CSS rule. Web browsers apply CSS rules to a document to affect how they are displayed in a web browser. The CSS rules consist of a set of properties and a selector. As we see here, this is the selector, and we'll write a set of properties here. There are different types of selector. We'll going to see in some time. Okay, so the next is floats. The float CSS property places an element on the left or right side of its container, allowing text and inline elements to wrap around it. For example, as we see here, we have declared this sidebar selector and we are assigning float property to the right. So the float properties values are left, right, none, and the inherit. So the CSS clear property can be used to position below left or right floated element. We'll use this clear property to position our other elements below the left or right floated elements. Okay, the next is difference between classes and IDs. IDs are meant to be unique within the document, and classes can be reused on multiple elements within the document. Okay, so the next is responsive design versus adaptive design. Both attempt to optimize the user experience across different devices, adjusting for different viewport size. The responsive designs, responsive websites that can look good on any device. Responsive websites uses media queries, flexible grids, and responsive images. Adaptive design instead of a flexible design, adaptive design detects the device and other features and then provides the appropriate feature and the layout based on a predefined set of viewport sizes and other characteristics. Okay, so the CSS selectors and combinators. combinators like white space, the greater than, tilde operator, and the plus sign. The universal selector, that is a star, this is called as universal selector. When we use this set of properties within this selector are applies to whole document. Then the element type selector, that is ULTD or any other elements like table, div, span. We write the CSS for element type selector. Then we have ID selector, which is used as this hash sign. Class selector, use the dot sign, as we see here. Dot box will apply the CSS for box as a we have written in a class of element. Then descendant combinator, as we see here. Space in between these two selector, this is called a descendant combinator, means the element which is having id as a id, and the this will be treated as parent element, and dot box means the element which is having the class box as a child element. So the CSS will apply to this element which is having box class, and if it has a parent as a id, then it will apply the CSS to the element. In this descendant combinator, it doesn't have to be an immediate child of the hash id. Then the next is a child combinator, this id greater than sign and the box. Unlike the descendant combinators, there can't be another element wrapping the box element. In this case, the box should be the direct child of this id element. Then the general sibling combinator, the tilde operator. Then the adjacent sibling combinator, the plus operator. The difference from general sibling combinators is that the targeted element must be an immediate sibling and not just a general sibling. Okay, the attribute selector, so it will match the input element which is having type as a text. Then the pseudo class, when the link is in hover state, the style will apply. Pseudo class uses a colon character to identify a pseudo state that an element might be in. As we see here, A is in hover state. Then the pseudo element, as we see here, it uses the double colon. The pseudo class uses the single colon, and the pseudo element uses double colon. This selector inserts an imaginary element into the page inside the targeted element and before its contents. The next is fixing browser specific style issues. After identifying the issue and the offending browser, use a separate style sheet that only loads when the specific browser is being used. This technique requires server-side rendering though. Then we can use libraries that already handles these styling issues. Can use auto prefixer to automatically add vendor prefixes to your code. You can use reset CSS or normalize CSS. So the difference between resetting and normalizing CSS. Resetting CSS means to strip all default browser styling on elements, and normalizing means preserve useful default styles rather than unstyling everything. So the next is how to create zebra strips. zebra strip table using nth child. As we see here, we can use the CSS to create the zebra strip table tr the nth child. So this background color will apply to every uh, even row in a table. So in this way we can create a zebra strip table. The next is, what is the purpose of clearing floats? The purpose of clearing floats is to control the floating elements by preventing overlapping. Okay, so the next is, what does this box sizing border box does? As you see here, this rule, the star box sizing and the value is border box. So what it will does, so the border box value of box sizing tells the browser that the uh, if any element is having border and padding, they calculate that border and padding values in the values of elements height and the width. Okay, then what is the difference between content box and the border box? These are two values of box sizing property. So in a content box, suppose we have an element which is having a border 2 pixel, padding 5 pixel, and the actual content size is height 10 pixel and the width 20 pixel. So in this case, the content box will calculate the uh, height, is just content height, and the sorry, so in a content box, the height and width value will exclude the border and the padding of a element, and in a border box it will include the border and padding size in width and the height of the element. Okay, so the next is responsive versus mobile first strategy. Responsive design starts on desktop, that is at the maximum required resolution, and then scales down to the smallest screen. And in a mobile first design, uh, it's the design is a will design it for smaller devices such as a mobile app first, and then adapt it to the layout that it can be viewed in neatly on tablet and then desktop devices. So the next is a specificity. If there are two or more CSS rules are written for the same element, then the CSS selector with the highest specificity value will win, and its a style declaration will be applied to the HTML element. So it's like the score or rank of a CSS rules, like the 1, 10, 100 and 1000. So the specificity level of a selector, that is inline styles, IDs, then classes or pseudo classes or attribute selectors, and the fourth is elements and the pseudo elements. As we seen, there are four level of selector: inline, IDs, then third is classes and pseudo classes and attribute selector, and the fourth is elements and the pseudo elements. As we see here examples of each, uh, we have this inline style for h1 element, which is color pink. Then we have declared the selector for id navbar. Then we have this class selector test. Then we have pseudo class using the colon, and then attribute using the square brackets and the attribute equal to attribute value. And the fourth is the elements, actual element is the h1 or the pseudo elements using the double colon as we see here before pseudo element. So these are the four levels of a specificity level of a selector. Okay, then how to calculate a specificity? To calculate a specificity, we'll start at 0. We'll add 100 for each ID value. We'll add 10 for each class value or pseudo class or attribute selector. Then we add 1 for each element selector or pseudo element selector. Inline style gets specificity value of 1000 and is always given the highest priority. So in case of sometimes we write multiple selectors to assign CSS properties to the element. So given the above way, we can calculate the specificity. And if we use the not important rule, it will override the inline styles also. It will take the first priority when we use the exclamatory important. As you see here, we use it using this combination of one exclamatory mark and the important word. This will take a highest priority.